This video was made possible thanks to the support of our amazing patrons. We couldn't do this without you.
Don't forget that you can support the channel for free and receive 10% off orders over $10 of Flipside Gaming by using the promo code Affinity at the checkout. Or if TCG Player or Magic Madhouse are more your thing, then be sure to place your order through our affiliate links in the description. Once again, at no extra cost to yourselves. Hello everyone and welcome back to Affinity for Commander. My name is Alex and today we've got a game involving mass exile, landfall shenanigans, life gain and a spell slinging dino. Today we are joined by Matt from Total MTG as well as Sumner, a freelance artist and writer quite prominent in the EDH community. Both of our fantastic guest social media accounts, as well as links to their channels or pages, will be in the description box below, so make sure you go check them out after the game. And a special super duper thanks to Sumner for supplying both Martin and I with these fantastic perfect fit sleeves for some of our favourite commanders, two of which you'll be able to see in this very game. But that's enough jibber jabber from me. Let's get into those opening hands.
My commander is Kalamax the Stormsire, heading a Spellslinger deck. I keep an opening hand containing Brainstorm, Glade Muse, Seedborn Muse, Dig Through Time, Rugged Highland, Myriad Landscape and Survivor's Encampment.
Matt is playing as Lathiel, Boundless Dawn Life Gain Unicorn deck. He keeps an opening hand of Selesnya Signet, Path to Exile, Good Fortune Unicorn, Reliquary Tower, Scavenger Grounds, Fabled Passage, and the Plains.
Sumner is playing his fair Xur the Enchanter deck. He keeps an opening hand of Whispering Madness, Ashiok Dream Render, Curse of Swine, Sol Ring, Tundra, Flooded Strand, and the Plains.
And finally, my commander is Omnath Locus of Creation, heading a landfall value deck. I keep an opening hand of Kodama's Reach, Ashaya Soul of the Wild, Swan Song, AC, Tyrant of Gaia Strait, Sol Ring, Wooded Foothills, and a Scalding Tarn.
Sumner is chosen to be on the play and starts things off by playing a Flooded Strand, which he immediately sacrifices, losing 1 life to put an Underground Sea into play. He then taps the dual land for a turn 1 Sol Ring and passes to Alex.
I, not wishing to be outdone, play a Scalding Tarn and then crack the fetch land, losing 1 life to put Plateau into play, which I then also use to cast a turn 1 Sol Ring. Satisfied, I end the turn.
In my turn I play a simple Rugged Highland, gaining a life. I then pass to Matt.
For his turn, Matt plays a Fabled Passage, cracks the fetch and finds a basic forest, putting the land into play. Matt then ends his turn.
Sumner starts his turn off by playing a Tundra, and then in a move that will continue to give Alex nightmares for years to come, casts Ashiok Dream Render. He then passes to Alex.
In my turn, I play an island, curse Ashiok for ruining my game plan, and then end my turn.
I play a Myriad Landscape as my land for turn, and lacking a 1-drop, pass to Matt.
Matt plays a Plains and then casts Selesnya Signet. Finally joining on the ramp train, Matt passes to Sumner.
For his turn, Sumner plays a Swamp and then casts his commander, Xur the Enchanter, in one of his own lovely artwork sleeves. Happily set up, Sumner ends his turn.
In my turn, I play a Flooded Strand, look at the Kodama's Reach in my hand, curse aggressively in my mind, and then pass to Martin.
I start off by playing Desolate Lighthouse as my land for turn, and then tap out to cast Glade Muse, a card that Alex hates, but I love.
It lets your opponents draw cards, therefore it's bad.
Well, we'll just see about that, dear. I then end my turn.
Matt plays a Forest and then casts Good Fortune Unicorn. Leaving but a single white mana open, Matt passes to Sumner.
In his turn, Sumner plays a Plains and then taps 4 mana to cast Leyline of the Void. So, no searching libraries and no bringing back stuff from the graveyard. Moving to combat, he attacks me for 1 with Xur, given that I am on the throne. Xur's ability triggers and Sumner uses this to put Psychic Corrosion into play. I then take 1 commander damage and Sumner ends his turn.
In my turn, I draw and realise I can't cast anything without searching, so I'm forced to pass, missing my land drop.
For my turn, I play a Survivor's Encampment and then move to combat. I attack Ashiok with my Majestic Deer, dealing the Planeswalker 2 damage. With nothing else to do, I pass to Matt.
Matt plays into the planes and then casts Dauntless Escort, revealing that his deck allows for all body types of Unicorn. He puts a +1/+1 counter on his Unicorn and then moves to combat. He attacks Ashiok for 3 with his Good Fortune Unicorn, reducing the Planeswalker's loyalty to 0, and finally allowing searching to once again occur. Matt then ends his turn.
A now Planeswalkerless Summoner plays a Sea of Clouds as his land for turn, which enters untapped, and then casts Whispering Madness. Alex, quite liking his hand now that he can search his library, responds with a Swan Song. He draws a card from Glade Muse and the spell is countered. Both spells are placed into exile and Summoner is compensated with a 2/2 Bluebird token. Moving to combat, Summoner declares an attack at Alex with his commander, and with Zer's trigger on the stack, I respond by casting Roiling Regrowth. I draw a card from Glade Muse and then sacrifice my Desolate Lighthouse to put an island and a forest into play tapped. Before combat damage occurs, Alex cracks his Wooded Foothill to put a Temple Garden into play tapped. Zer's trigger then resolves, which Summoner uses to put Rhystic Study onto the battlefield. Damage then occurs and Alex takes a mighty 1 damage. With nothing more to do, Summoner passes to Alex.
Finally now able to search my library, I cast Kodama's Reach, paying the 1 for Rhystic Study. I search my library for 2 forests, one I put onto the battlefield tapped and the other into my hand, which I immediately play. I then tap out to cast Calling Oracle, where I cannot pay for the Rhystic Study, so Summoner draws a card, which triggers Psychic Corrosion. Everyone besides Summoner exiles 2 cards on the top of their libraries, and I reveal Omnath, Locus of the World, as the card on top of my library, which I then put into my hand. Finished with my turn, I pass to Martin.
It's very sweet of you, dear. In my turn, I play a forest, and then tap 6 mana to cast Seedborn Muse, paying for the Rhystic Study tax. I then move to combat and attack Summoner with my 2/4 Elk. Summoner blocks with his bird, the bird is destroyed, and I end my turn.
In Matt's turn, Martin also untaps his permanents thanks to Seedborn Muse, and Matt plays a Reliquary Tower as his land for turn. He then casts his commander, Lathiel the Bounteous Dawn. Matt pays the Rhystic Study tax and puts a +1/+1 counter on his Good Fortune Unicorn. Moving to combat, Matt attacks Summoner with both his horned creatures for 7 damage. Out of blockers, Summoner takes the damage and Matt moves to his end step. Here Martin casts Brainstorm, paying the 1 for the Rhystic Study, and drawing a card from Glade Muse. After resolving the spell, Martin also activates and sacrifices his Myriad Landscape to put 2 islands into play tapped. Still in this incredibly long end step, Summoner casts Tainted Pact and draws a card from Martin's Muse. We all mill, or rather exile 2 cards from our libraries, and Summoner puts Kaya or Zob Usurper into his hand with the Pact's effect. He then finally proceeds to his turn.
During Summoner's upkeep, I, not wanting more Zer shenanigans, cast Rapid Hybridization, targeting the commander and paying 1 for Rhystic Study. Summoner responds to this with Fierce Guardianship, which costs no mana since Summoner controls his commander. Not to be deterred, I cast Reality Shift targeting Zer, once again paying the 1. The stack then resolves, I draw a card from my Muse, Zer is placed back into the command zone, and Summoner manifests the top card of his library. Fierce Guardianship counters Pongify, but I still draw another card as I cast it in Summoner's turn. Finally continuing with his turn, Summoner draws and everyone else exiles the top 2 cards of their libraries once more. Summoner then plays Emergent Zone as his land for turn, and then casts Lotus Petal. He then casts Praetor's Grasp, targeting Matt. Summoner searches Matt's library and chooses to exile a card face down. He then recasts his commander and passes the turn to Alex.
Martin and I both untap our opponents, and in my upkeep, because that's when things happen in this game now, Matt casts Path to Exile targeting Zer. He doesn't pay for the Rhystic Study tax, so Summoner draws a card, and everyone exiles the top 2 cards of their library. The spell resolves and Xur is once again put back into the command zone, and Summoner is compensated with a lovely snow-covered island. Moving to my main one, I cast my commander, Omnath, Locus of Creation, who has also been fitted with a lovely perfect sleeve, courtesy of Summoner. When Omnath enters, I draw a card and then play an Evolving Wilds as my land for turn, gaining 4 life from Omnath, and then crack the fetch to find and put into play a basic mountain. This triggers Omnath's second landfall ability, generating me 4 mana, which I then use to cast Omnath, Locus of the Royal. With this Omnath's ETB, I choose to deal 2 damage to Matt's commander. He responds to this by sacrificing his Rhino to give his creatures indestructible. With one less horny boy on the field, I cast Far Wanderings, not paying the Rhystic Study tax. So before I search, Summoner draws a card and everyone exiles 2 cards, a phrase I am quickly becoming tired of saying. My Wanderings then resolves and I put a Plains into play tapped, triggering Omnath's third landfall ability, dealing 4 damage to each of my opponents, and triggering my 3-colour Omnath to put a +1/+1 counter on my commander. Happy that I now have some level of board state, I end my turn.
Oh honey, your turn ends when I say it ends.
Oh, of course. In my end step, Martin casts Frantic Search, paying the 1 for Rhystic Study. He draws a card from Glade Muse, draws 2 from his search, untaps 3 land, and then discards, or rather exiles, 2 lands for the spell's ability, and then moves to his turn.
For my turn, feeling a little bit left out, I cast my own commander, Kalamax the Stormsire, who has also been fancified courtesy of our exiling themed guest. I then tapped my encampment to tap Kalamax for 1 green mana, and then used that to cast Artifact Mutation, again paying for the study. With my Dino now tapped, I copy the spell and put a +1/+1 counter on my commander. I then choose to destroy both Summoner and Alex's Soul Rings, generating myself 2 1/1 Sapling tokens. Moving to combat, I attack Matt with Seedborn Muse and Summoner with my Majestic Deer, neither player blocking and both taking 2 damage. I then pass to Matt and proceed to our untap step.
Matt begins his turn by playing Scavenger Grounds, and then casts Swiftfoot Boots, paying the 1 for Rhystic Study. He then equips his shoes to his unicorn, which is a sight in of itself, and Matt then attempts to end his turn. Martin responds by tapping Kalamax with the Survivor's Encampment to generate a blue mana. Martin then taps completely out to hard cast a Dig Through Time, a card makes significantly worse by not having a graveyard. He draws a card from Glade Muse and puts another +1/+1 counter on his commander. However, Matt would also like to join in by casting Inscription of Abundance, choosing to have his Good Fortune Unicorn fight Martin's Seaborn Muse. Matt, however, does not pay the 1, so Summoner draws and we all exile the top 2 cards of our libraries. The Muse is destroyed and Martin sets about resolving 2 Dig Through Times. After looking through the top 7 cards of his library twice and picking the best 4, the turn is finally passed to Summoner.
In Summoner's draw step, the rest of us exile 2 more cards from our libraries, and Summoner then plays a Bloodstained Mire. He immediately sacrifices the land, losing a life, and puts Scrubland into play. Wishing for some protection, Summoner casts Solitary Confinement, and then needing more cards to keep it around, he also casts Time Twister. We each shuffle our hands and whatever tiny amount of graveyards we have into our libraries, and each draw 7 new cards. This, however, also triggers Summoner's Psychic Corrosion 7 times, causing everyone else to exile 14 cards from the top of their libraries. Now fully restocked, Summoner casts a Talisman of Progress and ends his turn.
For my turn, I play Oboro Palace in the Clouds, triggering both my Omnaths. This gains me 4 life and I have to put another +1/+1 counter on my commander and now draw a card as I control 8 lands. I then cast a Timely Reclamation Sage, paying the 1, to which Summoner asks,
"But am I the threat?"
We all proceed to show the difference between our deck size and exile pile to prove a point. With the Elf's ETB, I choose to get rid of the Psychic Corrosion, my logic being that the confinement will eventually be sacked anyway as long as we all pay for the Rhystic Study. The enchantment is destroyed and I cast Azusa Lost But Seeking, paying the 1 for the Rhystic Study. Thanks to Azusa, I play Cinderglade as my next land, triggering both Omnaths again to add Omnath mana to my mana pool, put another +1/+1 counter on my commander, and then draw a card. I then play a Flooded Strand as my third land for turn, triggering the Omnath brothers to this time deal 4 damage to each of my opponents, put a +1/+1 counter on my counterless Omnath, and draw another card.
Having fun playing with yourself in the corner there?
I am actually. Moving to combat, I attack Martin with both of my Omnaths. He blocks both of my elementals with his adorable sapling tokens, and I then pass the turn.
I start my turn off by playing an island and then cast the Healy Sublime Artisan. Moving to combat, I attack Alex with my 6/6 Dino, and he chooses to block with his Coiling Oracle. The Sneck is squashed beneath my Dino's thunderous charge, and I then end my turn.
Matt casts Arcane Signet, paying the 1 for Rhystic Study, and then casts Life Gift, again paying the 1. He then plays Terramorphic Expanse as a land for turn, gaining a life from his enchantment. Matt then sacrifices the land to put a basic forest into play tapped, gaining another life. Matt moves to his end step, where Martin responds by casting Crop Rotation, paying the 1. He then copies a spell with Kalamax, draws a card from Glade Muse, makes a 1/1 server with Saheeli, and sacrifices a forest for the cost, and Martin puts a forest and an island into play untapped. Matt then puts 2 +1/+1 counters on Lathiel for the life he gained, and then passes to Summoner.
In his turn, Summoner skips his draw step and discards a card to keep his confinement around. Summoner then taps 1 mana to cast the Sensei's Divining Top that he stole from Matt earlier. He then plays a Serra's Sanctum as his land for turn, and activates his top to look at the top 3 cards of his library. After rearranging these cards, Summoner activates the top to draw a card.
Which in a weird turn of events, puts Matt's Sensei's Divine Top onto the top of his library, given that he is the owner.
We were just lucky that both had the card to hand really, otherwise it would have been quite awkward.
Indeed.
Moving on, Summoner casts Chrome Mox, exiling Dranith Magistrate beneath it. Moving to his end step, I respond,
Of course you do.
by casting Harrow. I pay for Rhystic Study, and Summoner responds to my spell and the various triggers now on the stack by casting an overloaded Cyclonic Rift.
My beautiful board state!
The Rift resolves, and all non-land permanents apart from Summoners are returned to their owner's hands. My trigger then resolves, I draw a card, put a +1/+1 server into play, and then, lacking any other types of basics to fetch, put 4 mountains into play untapped.
Can I have my turn now?
If you must, I suppose.
Moving to my turn, I recast my commander, paying the 1 and drawing a card with their ETB. I then cast Azusa once more, paying the 1, and then play Stomping Ground as my first land for turn, having it enter untapped, which bounces with Omnath so that I only gain 2 life.
You poor thing.
I know, right? I then use the ground to tap and bounce Oboro back to my hand to replay it as my second land for turn, which produces me 4 coloured mana. Using this 4 mana, I recast Reclamation Sage, paying the 1, this time getting rid of Summoner's Rhystic Study with the Elves ETB. Not quite finished, I tap and bounce Oboro again to replay the Palace as my third land for the turn, triggering Omnath's third landfall ability, dealing 4 damage to both Matt and Martin. Still not finished, I sack my Flooded Strand, lose 3 life, to have a Breeding Pool come into play untapped, which I use to cast a small Scoot Mob. With my board happily rebuilt, I pass the turn.
I start my turn by playing an island and then recast my commander, Kalamax the Stormsire. Wanting more mana, I cast Springleaf Drum, and then because my deck is 80% instants, end my turn.
Matt starts off by recasting his Arcane and Celestia Signets. He then taps 4 mana to cast a Walking Ballista with 2 +1/+1 counters on it. He then moves a counter from his Ballista to deal 1 damage to my Scoot Mob. Matt moves to his end step where Martin taps literally all of his mana to cast and copy Electro Dominance. He has both copies targeting me directly, dealing me 16 damage, and then puts Talran Sky Summoner and Saheeli Sublime Artisan into play with the spell's ability. Why am I getting the hate?
Summoner's untouchable and you have a board state.
Fair enough. With all spells resolved, Matt ends his turn.
In his upkeep, Summoner discards a card to keep his confinement around for another turn, and then ends his turn without casting anything.
For my turn, I recast other Omnath and have his ETB deal 2 damage to Martin's Talrand.
Rude.
I then tap and bounce Obero to replay the palace as my land for turn. This triggers both Omnaths, and Summoner responds by flashing in Notion Thief. In response to this, I cast Chord of Calling, where X is 4. I find and put Spitfire Lagak into play this way.
Why exactly?
Look, I thought I had Mystic Snake in the deck, alright, let's just leave it at that. Summoner's Thief then resolves, and he draws due to my Omnath's trigger. Deciding to push through, I Fast Seek, putting a basic island into play tapped, which triggers my commander, generating me 4 mana. 3-color Omnath also triggers, so Summoner draws a card, and Spitfire Lagak deals Martin and Matt 1 damage each. I then also remember to put 2 +1/+1 counters on my commander from both of my 3-color Omnath triggers this turn. I then pass to Martin.
In my turn, I cast a perfectly on-curve Soul Ring and recast my Glade Muse. I remember my Saheeli's trigger, putting another 1/1 server into play and keeping my 13 mana open, pass to Matt.
Looking to start flexing, Matt starts off by casting Aetherflux Reservoir.
What is that? Aetherflex Reservoir?
Whoa! Was so bad.
Yeah.
He then casts a Sense of Divining Top that Summoner graciously returned to him, gaining 1 life. Looking to make the most of his reservoir, Matt also recasts his Swiftfoot Boots, gaining 2 more life. He then equips his boots to his Ballista, don't ask, and then moves to his end step. Here Martin responds by tapping Kalamax with Springleaf Drum and uses that mana to help cast Natural Connection. Summoner then draws a card instead of Martin due to Glade Muse and Notion Thief. Martin makes a servo, puts a +1/+1 counter on his commander, and then fails to find any more basics in his library. Still in Matt's end step, Summoner casts Path to Exile, targeting my commander. Summoner draws a card from Glade Muse, and I put Omnath back into the command zone, and then choose not to search from the path, as would only draw Summoner another card. We then finally move to Summoner's turn.
Summoner begins his turn by discarding a card for his enchantment, and then taps a whopping 10 mana to recast his commander. That's an expensive 1/4.
It is Xur after all.
True. Summoner then passes to Alex.
In my main phase, I cast Enlightened Tutor, searching my library for Retreat to Coral Helm. I put the Retreat on top of my library and then cast Crush Contraband. I target Summoner's Solitary Confinement and Matt's Aetherflux Reservoir. The permanents are then exiled, and I, wishing to speed the game up in my favour, play Tunneling Geopede. I then tap and bounce my palace to replay it as my land for turn. This triggers both my Pingers and Omnath, to which Martin responds by casting Ravaging Blaze to deal 4 damage to both of my damage dealers. Martin puts a +1/+1 counter on Kalamax, makes a 1/1 servo token, and Summoner draws a card because of Martin's Muse. I become deeply enraged by this, considering Notion Thief is still in play, but the red creatures are destroyed and everyone other than me takes 2 damage. I put a +1/+1 counter on Omnath, and Summoner draws another card. Moving to combat, I attack Summoner with Omnath for 4 damage, which he does not block. I now, absolutely livid, pass the turn, to which Matt responds by tapping his top to look at the top 3 cards of his library. Martin then proceeds to his turn.
I begin my turn by casting Smuggler's Copter, triggering Saheeli to make a 1/1 servo token. Moving to combat, I attack Summoner with my Swole Dino. He decides to take the 7 commander damage, and I end my turn there.
Matt begins his turn by doing the rest of the table a favour by paying 4 mana to put a +1/+1 counter on his Ballista before removing the counter to deal 1 damage to the Notion Thief, destroying the card draw menace. Matt then recasts his commander, Lathiel the Boundless Dawn. He then plays Greypel Refuge for his land for turn, gaining a life. Matt then moves his shoes over to his Unicorn and then moves to his end step. Martin responds to this by casting and copying Chaos Warp, targeting Xur and one of his own servos. Xur is banished once more, the token ceases to exist, and Martin draws a card from Glade Muse. Martin replaces his servo with Saheeli, puts a +1/+1 counter on Kalamax, and then the warps fully resolve. Martin reveals Young Pyromancer, which goes straight onto the battlefield, and Sumner reveals Chain of Vapor, which stays on the top of his library. Sumner then moves to his turn.
Sumner starts his turn off by drawing that mysterious card, counts his mana, and then casts Felwar Stone. With nothing more to do, he passes the turn.
In my turn, I draw my mysterious card, and thanks Sweet Urza for being able to draw cards again. I replay my commander and draw a card with their ETB. I then play Scalding Tarn as my first land for turn, drawing a card, gaining 4 life, and putting a +1/+1 counter on my 4-colour Omnath. I then tap 6 to cast Rampaging Baloths, and with my new token producer out, sacrifice my Tarn to put an island into play. Going through another round of triggers, I draw a card, gain 4 coloured mana, put a +1/+1 counter on 3-colour Omnath, and create a 4/4 beast token. For my second land drop, I play Prairie Stream, which causes a lot of triggers to happen, to which Summoner responds by cracking his emergence zone, allowing him to play cards at instant speed. Using this and with my triggers still on the stack, he casts Crumbling Sanctuary. A very, very weird card that actually fits his deck's theme perfectly. So everyone apart from me exiles the top 4 cards of their library. I draw a card, make a beast, and put another counter on my 3-colour Omnath. I repeat this process once more by bouncing and replaying Oboro. Moving to combat, I attack Summoner for 7 with my 3-colour Omnath. He responds this by casting Chain of Vapor, targeting his own Manifest. He declares no blocks and exiles the top 7 cards of his library. So, successfully set up for some big swings next turn, I pass to Martin.
I start my turn by playing Rogue's Passage and then crew my Smuggler's Copter with a servo. I activate Saheeli's minus ability to make one of my servos into a copy of the animated Smuggler Copter. I activate Rogue's Passage, giving my commander unblockable, and then move to combat where I attack Alex of Kalamax and my 2 Smuggler's Copters, looting twice with the attack triggers. Unable to block, Alex exiles the top 14 cards of his library instead of taking damage. I then end my turn, leaving a generous amount of mana open.
Matt starts off by casting Soul Ring and then Sunscorched Regent. He then moves his boots over to the dragon and also casts Ajani the Great-Hearted, giving all of his creatures vigilance. Matt then pluses Ajani to gain 3 life and then moves to combat. Here he attacks Saheeli with his dragon, and in response, Martin taps 13 mana to cast Volcanic Geyser copied, having both copies target me. Martin creates 2 1/1 servos, and Matt's dragon gets a +1/+1 counter and gains him a life. I exile the remaining 22 cards from my library, and Saheeli's loyalty is then reduced to 0. Moving to his end step, Matt puts 4 +1/+1 counters on his Ballista thanks to Lathiel's ability, and then passes to Summoner.
In his turn, Summoner casts Helm of Obedience, making us all deeply regret our life choices. Given that no cards can go to the graveyard, the Helm is essentially an instant library milling ability for 1 mana. Matt puts a +1/+1 counter on his dragon, and Summoner then ends his turn.
Moving to my turn, I untap, have my upkeep, and Summoner responds by activating his Helm to completely mill out Martin. I go to draw a card, and lose the game.
In my turn, I also go to my draw step, and lose the game as well.
Matt begins his turn by activating his top to look at the top 3 cards of his library and rearrange them. He then casts Alhamret's Archive and pluses Ajani to now gain 6 life. Matt then casts Good Fortune Unicorn and activates his top, but due to the archive he instead draws 2 cards. Now really pushing hard for his win here, Matt casts Soul Warden, putting a +1/+1 counter on Good Fortune Unicorn and gaining 2 life. Matt then equips his shoes to his unicorn and moves to combat. Here he attacks Summoner for 18 damage. No blockers are declared, and Summoner exiles 18 cards from his library, and Matt gains 4 life from his commander and the archive. Moving to his end step, Matt puts 12 +1/+1 counters on his ballista.
How many cards does Summoner have left in his library?
18.
Ooh, he's got it!
Matt then removes all counters from his ballista to deal Summoner 18 damage, making him exile the rest of his library. Matt then ends his turn.
Moving to his draw step, Summoner is unable to draw and loses the game, crowning Matt the victor.
So, I did not see that coming. Congratulations to Matt for squeezing that victory out within the tiniest of margins. He absolutely deserved it. Commiserations to Summoner, and big commiserations to both Martin and I. But that will be the end of the video for today, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. Be sure to check out our fantastic guest accounts in the description box below. But before you run off, make sure to do a few things for us. Subscribe to this channel and like this video if you like this type of content, and drop us a comment below. What did you think about the game? We make sure we read every single one of them. As always, you can follow us on Twitter @4Commander, and if you really like the channel, you could consider becoming a patron of it yourself for access to exclusive EDH related rewards and a chance to support us directly. As always, guys, I have been Alex. Stay safe out there, and we will see you next time.